I worked at a water park for 3 summers during college. It was a pretty popular place just outside the city. Huge wave pool, lazy river, a dozen slides, and one massive tower with 4 body slides that dropped nearly straight down. During the day, the place was chaos. Kids screaming, whistles blowing, water sloshing everywhere. But at night, it was a completely different world. When the park closed at 8 p.m., the crowds disappeared fast. Within 30 minutes, it went from thousands of people to maybe 6 employees left behind for closing duties. That summer, I had the closing shift. My job was simple: walk through the park, make sure all the gates were locked, the lights were off, and that nobody had stayed behind. It sounds easy, but a water park at night is surprisingly creepy. Without the crowds and music, all you hear is the sound of water moving through pipes and the occasional creak of metal structures. Most nights were uneventful, but one night in July still sticks with me. It was a Tuesday. The park had been unusually busy that day, and by the time we finished cleaning the locker rooms and emptying trash cans, it was already past 10 p.m. My supervisor told me to do one final walkthrough of the park before we locked the main gate. I grabbed my flashlight and started the usual route. First, the lazy river. The pumps were still running, pushing water slowly around the empty channel. The floating tubes had all been stacked against the wall. Without anyone there, the river looked strangely still, like a dark loop of water winding through the park. Next, I checked the kids' splash area. All the colorful fountains and water cannons were shut off. The giant tipping bucket that dumped water every few minutes during the day was silent and hanging above the playground, like some giant metal drum. Then I headed toward the big slide tower. It stood at the far end of the park. During the day, it was the loudest area. People climbing the stairs, lifeguards shouting instructions, bodies shooting down the slides. At night, it looked like a giant metal skeleton rising into the sky. The floodlights around the tower were off except for one dim maintenance light near the bottom. The slides themselves twisted around the structure like long black tubes, disappearing into darkness. I started climbing the stairs to the platform. Part of the closing routine was checking that no one had gotten stuck up there or decided to hide somewhere stupid. You'd be surprised how often teenagers tried to sneak back into the park after closing. The climb to the top platform was about 6 stories. Halfway up, the only sound was my footsteps on the metal steps and the faint hum of water pumps somewhere below. When I reached the top, I swept my flashlight across the platform. Empty. 4 slide entrances stood there, each with a small fiberglass launch chamber where riders would lie down before dropping. Everything looked normal. I turned around and started heading back down the stairs. And that's when I heard it. The sound of rushing water inside one of the slides. At first I thought it was just water flowing through the system. But then I heard something else. A body sliding. If you've ever gone down a water slide, you know the sound. That quick, hollow rushing noise, followed by a splash at the end. I froze halfway down the staircase. The sound had come from the tallest slide, the one that dropped almost straight down from the top platform. I stood there listening. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Then I heard it, the splash, loud and clear. Someone had just come out of the slide into the catch pool at the bottom. My first thought was that someone had stayed behind in the park and climbed the tower after closing, which was bad enough. But what confused me was this. I had just been at the top platform 30 seconds earlier, and there was no one there. Still, I figured someone could have run up while I was coming down the stairs. So I hurried the rest of the way down. When I reached the bottom, I shined my flashlight into the catch pool. The water rippled gently from the splash, but the pool was empty. No one was in the water. No one was climbing out. I walked around the pool, scanning the ground and the nearby walkway. Nothing. The exit gate at the bottom of the slide was still locked. No footprints. No movement. Just the quiet sloshing of water. I felt a chill run up my arms. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. Another sliding sound. This time from a different slide. I slowly turned my flashlight toward the tower. The sound was unmistakable. Someone moving fast through the long enclosed tube. It echoed through the plastic like a hollow, rushing roar. But the top platform was pitch black, and I knew no one had gone up there. 3 seconds later, splash, another catch pool. I walked over and shined my light again. The water was moving, but the pool was empty. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself there was some kind of mechanical explanation. Maybe trapped water was releasing through the slides. Maybe the pumps were pushing something through the system. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard. 2 separate slides, 2 separate splashes, like 2 different people had come down. I backed away from the tower. At that point, my instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I had to check one more thing: the slide tower staircase. If someone had actually gone up there, they'd have to come back down eventually. So I aimed my flashlight at the stairs and waited. For about 20 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps, metal steps creaking, slow, heavy, coming down from the top platform. My heart started pounding. I took a few steps closer to the tower and raised the flashlight higher. The staircase above me was empty, but the footsteps kept coming. Step, step, each one echoing through the metal structure. They stopped about halfway down, right where I had been standing earlier. I held my breath. The park was completely silent, except for the faint hum of pumps. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they were going back up, climbing toward the top platform. Slowly, deliberately. I didn't stay to find out who or what was up there. I turned around and walked straight out of the park. When I reached the main gate, my supervisor asked why I looked so pale. I told him someone might have been on the slide tower. He checked the security cameras later that night. According to the footage, no one had entered the park after closing. No one had climbed the tower, and no one had used the slides. But the cameras did capture something strange. Right around the time I was at the tower, the water in 2 of the catch pools suddenly splashed upward, like something heavy had just landed in them, even though no one was there. I didn't work the closing shift again after that, and to this day, I refuse to go near that slide tower, because I'm convinced that after the park closes, something still rides the slides. I worked as a lifeguard at a large water park for 2 summers during college. Most people think that job is just sitting in a chair watching people swim all day, but there's actually a lot more to it. You have to do rotations, monitor different areas, and stay alert constantly. One mistake can mean someone gets seriously hurt. The water park I worked at had a huge wave pool that was easily the most crowded attraction in the entire park. During the day, it was chaos. Hundreds of people packed into the water, waves crashing every few minutes, kids jumping around, whistles blowing. The lifeguard towers were placed all around the pool so guards could watch every section. But after closing time, the wave pool area became one of the eeriest places in the entire park. The pool lights would stay on for a while, and the massive pool would just sit there, perfectly still. No music, no splashing, just this huge empty body of water reflecting the lights from the surrounding towers. One night in late August, I had the closing shift again. By the time the last guests left and the park cleared out, it was almost 9:30 p.m. The cleaning crew had already finished the locker rooms, and the maintenance team was checking the pumps. My job that night was simple: do one last sweep around the wave pool area and make sure everything was clear before the lights were shut off. I walked around the edge of the pool with a flashlight, checking under the lifeguard chairs and along the walkways. Sometimes kids would hide towels or bags under the stands and forget them. The water in the pool was completely calm. When the waves aren't running, the pool looks like a giant dark mirror. I had almost finished my check when something caught my attention. One of the lifeguard towers across the pool had someone sitting in it. At first, I thought it was another guard, but then I realized something. All the other guards had already left. I had watched them clock out 20 minutes earlier. The person in the tower was sitting perfectly still, just a dark silhouette against the pool lights behind them. I figured maybe someone had stayed behind to grab something or forgot to clock out, so I called across the pool, "Hey, we're closed." No response. The figure didn't move. They were just sitting there, facing the water. I started walking around the pool toward the tower. The sound of my footsteps echoed across the empty concrete. Still nothing. The person didn't react. When I got closer, I noticed something strange. The way they were sitting didn't look natural. Their back was perfectly straight, too straight, and their head was tilted slightly downward, like they were staring into the water. I stopped about 20 feet away and called again. "Hey, park's closed. You gotta head out." Still nothing. Now I was getting annoyed. I thought maybe it was a guest who had snuck back into the park and climbed the tower. That happened occasionally with teenagers trying to mess around after closing. So I walked right up to the base of the tower. The ladder went straight up to the chair about 15 feet above the ground. I pointed my flashlight up. The chair was empty. Completely empty. I stood there for a second, confused. I could have sworn someone was sitting there. The angle of the lights had made a perfect silhouette, but now there was nothing. I climbed the ladder just to be sure. When I reached the top, I looked around the entire pool area. Empty. No one anywhere. I climbed back down and started heading toward the pump room building nearby. That's when I heard the whistle. A single, sharp lifeguard whistle blast. The exact kind guards use to get swimmers' attention. It came from behind me, from the wave pool. I turned around immediately. The water was still perfectly calm. But the whistle blew again. 2 short blasts. Every lifeguard knows that signal. It means someone is in trouble. My stomach dropped. I scanned the water with my flashlight. Nothing. The pool was empty. Then I noticed something else. The lifeguard tower I had just checked now had someone sitting in it again. The same silhouette, same position, perfectly still. My heart started racing. I knew I had just been up there. I knew the chair was empty, but now someone was sitting in it again. I slowly walked back toward the tower, my flashlight shaking in my hand. As I got closer, the silhouette didn't move, didn't react, just sat there watching the water. I stopped about 30 feet away, and then something happened that I still can't explain. The silhouette stood up, not suddenly, slowly, like someone rising from a chair. But when it stood, it was too tall. Its head stretched above the top of the lifeguard tower railing. No person could have been that tall in that chair. Then the figure leaned forward and jumped straight into the wave pool. I ran to the edge of the pool expecting to see someone in the water, but there was no splash, no ripples, nothing. The surface of the water was perfectly smooth, like nothing had touched it. The lifeguard tower behind me creaked slightly in the wind. I didn't stay there another second. I walked straight back to the staff building and told my supervisor someone might still be in the wave pool area. He checked the cameras. Every camera around the pool showed the same thing. The entire area was empty. No one had climbed the tower. No one had jumped into the water. But right at the time I said the figure jumped, the cameras caught something strange. The water in the center of the pool suddenly formed a huge ripple, like something massive had just entered it. But there was nothing there. No one in the pool. No one in the tower. Because even now I'm convinced that when the park shuts down, someone is still watching the water from that tower. I didn't work at the water park as a lifeguard. I worked maintenance, which meant my job was basically everything people didn't see. Fixing broken slides, checking water filters, clearing drains, and most importantly, maintaining the pump systems that kept the entire park running. A lot of people don't realize how complicated a water park actually is. Every pool, every slide, every lazy river has a massive filtration and pumping system running underneath it. Miles of pipes move thousands of gallons of water every minute, and all of that equipment sits in underground pump rooms. Most guests never even notice them, but if you work maintenance, you spend a lot of time down there. Dark, concrete rooms, loud machines, constant humming from motors and pipes. You get used to it. But there was one pump room in the park that everyone avoided. It was under the lazy river. Technically, it was called Pump Station C, but everyone just called it the tunnel. The entrance was hidden behind a locked service door near the back of the park. Once you went inside, a narrow concrete staircase led down about 15 feet underground. At the bottom was a long maintenance corridor. On one side were huge pipes carrying water from the lazy river. On the other side were filtration tanks and pump motors the size of small cars. The place was loud. Even during the day, the sound of the machines echoed through the tunnel like thunder. But late at night, when some of the pumps were turned off, the place felt completely different. Quiet. Too quiet. I found that out during my second summer working there. It was about 11 p.m., and the park had been closed for hours. Most of the maintenance crew had already left, but my supervisor asked me to check Pump Station C before locking up. Apparently, one of the pressure gauges had been acting strange earlier in the day, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed over. The park was almost completely dark by that point. Only a few security lights were still on. Walking through an empty water park at night is unsettling enough, but going underground into a pump tunnel alone, that's a whole different level of creepy. I unlocked the service door and stepped inside. The concrete staircase led down into darkness. My footsteps echoed off the walls as I went down. At the bottom, I switched on the overhead maintenance lights. They flickered a couple times before turning on fully. The corridor stretched about 50 feet ahead. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and large pumps lined the walls. Everything looked normal. I walked down to the pressure gauge and checked it. The reading looked fine. No issues. I was about to head back up when I heard something. A knock. 3 slow knocks. Somewhere deeper in the tunnel, I froze. The sound came from the far end of the corridor, near the secondary pump room door. At first I thought it might just be pipe shifting. Water systems can make strange noises. But then it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. Clear as day. Someone knocking on metal. My first thought was that another maintenance worker had come down after me. So I called out, "Hey, who's down there?" No answer. The tunnel stayed completely silent. I slowly started walking toward the far end. My flashlight beam moved across the concrete floor and the rows of machines. When I reached the secondary pump room door, I noticed something strange. The door was locked from the outside, which meant no one should have been inside. I leaned closer and listened. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard something on the other side. Footsteps, slow footsteps, walking across the concrete floor. My stomach tightened. The only access to that room was the door in front of me, and it was still locked. I stepped back from the door. The footsteps stopped. Then the knocking started again. This time it was louder. Bang, bang, bang. The metal door vibrated with each hit. Someone was definitely on the other side. But that didn't make any sense. No one could be in there. I quickly unlocked the door. Part of me thought maybe a worker had gotten locked inside earlier. I pulled the handle and opened it. The room was empty, completely empty. Just another row of pumps and pipes. No one inside, no place for anyone to hide. I stood there staring for a few seconds. Then I heard something behind me, a splash. From the tunnel corridor, I turned around fast. At the far end of the hallway, water was spreading across the floor, like something had just stepped out of the lazy river pipes. The water kept dripping onto the concrete. Drip, drip, drip. My flashlight beam moved slowly across the floor, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, wet footprints, appearing one after another, like someone invisible was walking toward me. Step, another wet footprint appeared. Step, another, each one forming right in front of my eyes, moving down the tunnel, coming straight toward where I was standing. I didn't wait to see how close they would get. I ran, up the staircase, through the service door, and straight across the empty park. The next morning, my supervisor checked the tunnel cameras. They showed the corridor the entire time I was down there. No one entered, no one exited. But right around the time I said the knocking started, the cameras caught something strange. Water suddenly began dripping from the pipes, and wet footprints appeared across the concrete floor, one after another, moving down the tunnel, with no one there to make them. After that night, I refused to go back into Pump Station C alone, because whatever was down there was still walking through those tunnels. I worked security at a large water park for one summer when I was 22. Most people assume security at a water park is an easy job. During the day, it mostly is. You're just watching for fights, lost kids, or people sneaking alcohol into the park. But my shift started when the park closed. From 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., the entire property was basically empty except for one maintenance worker and me. The park looked completely different at night. All the music was off. The wave machines were silent. The bright colors of the slides looked dull and strange under the dim security lights. And without the crowds, you could hear everything. Water moving through pipes. Wind pushing against the slide towers. metal stairs creaking. Most nights were quiet, until the night I heard someone using the tallest slide in the park. The Waterpark had a huge attraction called the Plunge. It was a massive enclosed slide that started from a tower about 7 stories high. Riders would enter through a dark tunnel, drop almost straight down, then spiral through a long tube before splashing into a catch pool at the bottom. During the day, it was the most popular ride in the park, but at night it looked terrifying. The slide tower was this huge, dark structure rising above everything else, and the long black tube wrapped around it like a giant snake. Part of my patrol route was walking around the slide area to make sure no one had jumped the fences. Teenagers sometimes tried sneaking in after closing to ride the slides. That's why all the slide water pumps were turned off at night. No water meant no one could ride them, or at least they weren't supposed to. It was about 1:40 a.m. when I walked past the slide tower that night. Everything looked normal. The area was empty, the entrance gates were locked, and the catch pool at the bottom of the slide was completely still. I was halfway across the walkway when I heard something. A scraping sound, then a rushing noise, like someone sliding through a long plastic tunnel. I stopped immediately. I knew that sound. Anyone who has ridden a water slide knows the hollow rushing echo when someone moves through it. But that was impossible. The pumps were off, the slide was dry, and the park had been closed for hours. I stood there listening. The sound grew louder. Someone or something was definitely moving through the slide. Fast, then suddenly, splash. The sound of someone hitting the catch pool at the bottom. I ran toward the pool and shined my flashlight across the water. Nothing. The water rippled for a moment, but there was no one there. No one climbing out. No one swimming. Just the sound of water slowly settling. I walked around the pool area with my flashlight, checking every corner. No footprints. No movement. The exit gate was still locked. I told myself it had to be something mechanical. Maybe water trapped in the slide had suddenly released. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what I heard. Because 30 seconds later, it happened again. This time the sound came from the very top of the tower. The rushing noise started faintly, then echoed down the entire slide, like someone launching from the entrance platform. My flashlight beam slowly moved upward toward the tower. The staircase wrapped around the structure, disappearing into darkness. And for a split second I saw movement. At the top platform, a shape. Standing near the slide entrance. My heart started racing. Someone had definitely climbed up there. But how? The gate was locked, and the ladder to the tower had a security chain. I started walking toward the base of the tower. The rushing sound inside the slide grew louder. Then again, splash. The catch pool rippled violently. Still no one inside it. This time I backed away. Something about the situation didn't feel right. And then I heard footsteps above me. Metal steps creaking on the slide tower staircase. Slow, heavy, like someone walking down. I aimed my flashlight up the stairs. Nothing, but the footsteps continued. Step, step, step. They stopped halfway down the staircase, exactly where the light from my flashlight ended, right at the edge of darkness. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I could hear breathing, slow breathing, coming from the staircase, but I couldn't see anyone. Then suddenly the footsteps started again, but instead of coming down, they turned around and began walking back up. Step, 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 climbing toward the top platform. I stood frozen, watching the dark outline of the staircase. The breathing faded. The footsteps disappeared. And for about a minute, everything was silent again. Then one final sound came from the slide, the loudest rushing noise yet, like something massive going down the tunnel. It lasted longer than the others, much longer. Then the splash came. The water in the catch pool exploded upward. I jumped back. When the water settled, I pointed my flashlight across the surface. Nothing, no one there, but something strange floated briefly on the surface. A lifeguard whistle the lifeguards wear during the day. It drifted slowly across the water before sinking under the surface. The next morning, I told the park manager what happened. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and told me something that still bothers me. About 5 years earlier, a lifeguard had fallen from that slide tower late one night while closing the ride. He died before anyone could reach him. Since then, a few employees had reported hearing the slide running after the park closed. No one had ever found an explanation. I finished the rest of the summer working security there, but I never walked past that slide tower again after midnight, because I'm pretty sure that once the park goes quiet, someone still rides the last slide.